Hello again, everyone. I just want to take a minute to say congratulations to Dr. Vedya and team, everyone from his medical staff to his research crew to even the AV guys here over on the side. What a great conference. What a great set of advocates for robotics. I don't think I need to be here, honestly, because the surgeons that are here are such better proponents than any of the folks in Pittsburgh. And so that's refreshing and exciting. It's great to see such a flux of excitement about the technology and the sorts of things that we think Navio can do. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see is the possibilities in the future of robotics, particularly with Navio, because, of course, that's my frame of reference. But robotics is here and it's now, and like Dr. Copper just said, I think it's an eventuality. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of what I think is going to come maybe in the next few years from Navio and from other systems. And, we'll cross our fingers and hope that it comes true. But just for some perspective, I want to talk a little bit about the past of robotics. So we've been doing orthopedic robotics for 25 years, really. The first system was the Robotics system. And this is the predecessor to the Think Surgical robot, which has a similar form factor today. It's this industrial robot that's doing milling of the femoral canal during total hip replacement. And so that was back in the 90s. It came out of IBM. And it was followed up over the years by a multiple number of different systems. A lot of the systems aren't here anymore. For instance, the Acrobat system is actually the predecessor to Mako. It's the first system that was using haptic feedback for robotics. The first spine robot, the Mazor system, which we spoke about in my talk yesterday about passive robotics and its ability to guide in spine procedures. And even for Smith & Nephew, there was a robot called the Praxitelis robot that came from Plus Orthopaedics. And that was actually a small total knee robot that was mounted to the bone. Unfortunately, it didn't catch on. Perhaps it was a little bit before its time. And finally, I guess the big gorilla of surgical robotics and orthopedics is the Mako system from Stryker, again, using haptic feedback in order to control the cutting, and followed up very closely by Navio, which was initiated at Blue Belt Technologies back in Pittsburgh, which is where I came from, and now it's Smith & Nephew. Navio's specific history stems back from 2004 when Blue Belt was incorporated out of Carnegie Mellon University. But from a commercial perspective and a clinical perspective, it really starts in 2002 with our first in man in Belgium. Dr. Johan Bellemans did the first Navio UKA in Leuven. And after that, we've had regular updates, maybe 1 or 2 releases a year, as Dr. Copper said, of software. Everybody thinks it's cheap and easy and free because you get your cell phone and it automatically installs updates for you even when you don't want to. We don't have the luxury of being able to push things directly to your robots in the field, but we do try to fix things as quickly as we can in the medical device industry. And so we've done a regular number of updates from Navio 1 to Navio 4, where we incorporated patellofemoral as an application and started to internationalize the system, writing it in different languages, etc. Navio 5, which was the full commercial release of the Navio for TKA. That happened just last year. It feels like it's been about 5 years since we started, but and there were some growing pains, of course. You get this out there and you think that you've got it perfect, and then your users use it in the real world, and then all of a sudden you've got to go back to the drawing board. And hence we've spent the last year developing Navio 6, the distal burring technique, which has been a boon for us, actually kind of exhibiting the benefits of robotics from an accuracy perspective. And so our team is just in the preparation phase of final design and then starting to implement the Navio 7 system. And so Navio 7 is actually going to take the feedback we've gotten from the last 2 years of total knee and really turn it around from a workflow perspective. So our goals are to make measured resection techniques simpler and easier, as well as fully still supporting the soft tissue balancing philosophy and having that be much more streamlined and incorporating more of the mesh data, more of the shape data than doing explicit landmarks as they do in some of the other systems. So that was then, as the monkey said, this is now. So where do we go from here? The short-term gains, I think, in progress of robotics are going to be an indication expansion. So what are the other applications we can do? We have the partial and total knee market completely flushed now with robotics. You've got our Journey, Uni, and Legion, and Genesis, and all the other systems out there that are supported on a robotic system. But what is next for Navio? I think the short-term gains from a knee perspective can be going bigger and going smaller. So you can imagine preoperatively planning relative to a CT scan to find MRI scan to find focal defects that you need to prepare. You can plan those and locate and target those very simply and accurately using the Navio system. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the revision application. So you take the primary implants off during revision, and what do you have left? Well, this is where robotics comes in. Robotics allows you to assess the joint very quickly and easily, and then with Navio, you can make the precise cuts that you need in order to put things in, such as your augments, such as cones, those sorts of features that may be a little bit tricky or maybe a lot of bit tricky from an instrumentation perspective, can be made simpler using robotics. So what about beyond knee? So I get a lot of questions about total hip replacement. It's a huge market, still an unsolved problem, admittedly more successful than knees, and so that's why we've tackled the knee replacement. But there are still some improvements you can make in the hip, especially with the huge volume of patients that are out there getting total hips. Even small percentages of failures are significant numbers. Resurfacing as a minimal bone removal operation is very interesting to us, particularly with the Birmingham hip. And then we have extremities, which are a little bit more marginal procedures, but no less important to the patients that receive them. Ankle replacement is traditionally very challenging. It's difficult from an approach perspective. We see that as an opportunity for robotics and targeted bone cutting, maybe even being able to evolve the surgical techniques because you can come in from a different angle or a different surgical incision, leveraging robotics to keep you accurate. And shoulder replacement, analogous to hip, again, controlled cutting allows for different accesses and different shapes that can be made. Smith & Nephew is I'm a proud leader in sports medicine, and so there are other opportunities for robotics as well. So ACL, tunnel placement, is still under debate where you should put your tunnels. You have different strategies, single bundle, double bundle, quadruple bundle. Navio will eventually be able to do all of those very accurately, whether it's relative to intraoperative information or relative to preoperative plans built from perhaps an MR. Femoral acetabular impingement is an application that's actually pretty near and dear to my heart. As Blue Belt, we actually started to prototype a Navio FAI application, and that can dovetail very nicely with preoperative planning that you see here. This is the Dionix plan system that was commercialized by Smith & Nephew a few years ago. And so you can imagine marrying these concepts of preoperative patient-specific planning of a bone deformity like a CAM in a femoral acetabular impingement situation, and being able to leverage robotics, especially when you have a difficult access and perhaps maybe a procedure that's not done by anyone but the most practiced surgeons. So this can democratize these sorts of procedures, particularly in an arthroscopic perspective. So that's indication expansion. Where do we go from there? Technology is the next step. Now, this may be a bit of a simple projection, but I think it's important to note that computers have proven that things, in electronics particularly in technology, start big and end small. We have room-sized computers here on the left. On the right, we have cell phones, which are orders of magnitude, probably millions of times more powerful than what we had back at the advent of computing. And the size of computers continues to get smaller. Anybody that's looked at USB drive or things, earbuds, they're all incorporating computers and allowing us to miniaturize computation everywhere. Mobile phones, of course, have evolved over the years from the earliest designs in the 1980s through to the 90s, 2000s, and now really we're just limited from the perspective of our interface to the devices. It's no longer that the device has to be large enough to work. Now it's just a matter of it has to be large enough for us to interact with it. So surgical robotics will obviously follow the same trend. So we start with very large room-sized robots, eventually going smaller and smaller into a more portable system that can be moved from OR to OR. But as anyone in here could guess, there's no real reason that in the future this cart can simply go away, and all the computation can be embedded in the handpiece with perhaps maybe a 1200K display off to the side displaying all the information. A little bit about human-computer interaction. The drawing to the left is actually a picture of an old system that's called the ESOP system, which was the first voice-controlled endoscopy holder. It was a system from the 1990s. It was actually featured on the show ER, if anyone knows the show ER from the U.S. It was featured there. I think I was probably in college whenever that was demonstrated, so that was pretty exciting. But you can imagine now, with the advent of technologies like Amazon Alexa and the voice recognition that you get in your cell phone, the sorts of interactions you would have with a system in the operating room, whether it be CAS or robotics, you're going to have eventually have a conversation. You're going to be able to tell the computer to make certain adjustments. And maybe in the future, you'll be able to have the computer anticipate those reactions, in fact, make those judgments for you. Machine learning is a technology in which massive amounts of data can be aggregated, analyzed, and then recommendations or calculations can be made relative to that. We have an opportunity with robotics that actually Dr. Girani had made a great point about the feedback loop from getting information. The key, I think, in the future is going to be the ability to rapidly react to the trends that happen. So as it is right now, we do an innovation. We wait for outcomes data 10, 15, 20 years later. We make an adjustment, then we try again. What we can do with Navio and other robotic systems is get that information in real time on the operating table in the office visit afterwards. And that information can get collected, fed back into the robot, get fed back into the cloud, and this data from multiple systems, multiple procedures, multiple surgeons can be aggregated, segmented, and iterated upon in order to create better systems and ultimately better surgeons. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about augmented reality because this is a big technological advancement in the way we interact with computers. Augmented reality, for those of you that are not familiar, although it's tough to imagine now with all the hype in augmented reality, augmented reality is like virtual reality, except it's not just taking you and putting you in an immersive world that's independent of your surroundings. Augmented reality is taking your view and your interaction with the real world and augmenting it with new data. So the ability to overlay information onto the patient or into your operating room is the promise for our field in augmented reality. But augmented reality in computer-assisted surgery is not new. Back in 2000, University of North Carolina were actually the pioneers in this. If you see is a drawing that's been on the internet as long as it seems like the internet has existed on and kind of conceptual augmented reality for medicine. And on the right is a prototype that was developed. This is your precursor to your Microsoft HoloLens, built back in the early days at UNC. And in fact, I was personally involved in some research that was developed at Carnegie Mellon University to do a project we called Image Overlay. It was actually one of my first projects as a graduate student. What we see here is kind of is a conceptual prototype. This is not a real patient on the table. This was never commercialized or approved, even under an IRB. But the idea is that we have a display projecting a rendered image of the patient's pelvis as well as the cup orientation or a surgical plan overlaid on top of the patient real time in the OR. This device that you see to the upper left is basically the big brother of what we have now on your head in an augmented reality headset. And those headsets are a reality too. In fact, you see in the lower left, this is the Microsoft HoloLens. It's probably the most famous of a number of headsets that have been developed over the last few years. The system called the Meta 2 from Meta. Magic Leap is a new system that's come out, actually, ironically enough, from the former head of Mako. And also, there are a number of different medical device companies that are trying to come up with their own OR-friendly versions of this concept. But this is a projection through the headset of spine data from this patient aligned to the patient, again, showing a surgical plan or perhaps instrument positions as the surgeon sees it. So the surgeon moves his head left to right. These images update in real time in order to give you an overlay onto the patient. For Navio, we recognize that this is compelling and actually solves problems for us in the operating room. You can imagine replacing the monitor that we have. I don't know if the surgeons here in the room that have used Navio are frustrated with having to look off to the side or maybe deal with a touch screen. But you can imagine, instead of having the information on a screen that has to be in your operative field, if you could just project the purple, blue, and green rainbow directly onto the patient and see where you needed to cut and where you were finished, this is the eventual reality of augmented reality for Navio. And really, this is kind of the conceptual dream of what we have here, with very simple, basic hardware, whether it's a headset display in the lower left or maybe even just a pair of glasses in the upper right. This is the dream of the next generation of intraoperative robotics and computer-assisted surgery, having all the information and all the decisions being presented to you for you to use in the OR. Thank you, and congratulations on a great conference.